Well, it looks as though Donald Trump may be eyeing a former rival in his search for a running mate. Trump is considering Florida Senator Marco Rubio to join his ticket, according to six people familiar with the search. He's now on the short list, which could still be a crowded field of potential picks, around 15 people, according to Trump. I want to bring in NBC News correspondent Dasha Burns in Palm Beach, Florida. Former Republican congressman from Florida, Carlos Curbelo. Biden 2020 campaign senior advisor, Alencia Johnson. So, Dasha, what can you tell us about Rubio possibly joining this ticket?
Well, look, he is moving on up into the short list, Jose. Look, he's young, he's telegenic, he spent more time in federal office than Vice President Harris has, and he is the Miami-born son of Cuban immigrants at a time when former President Trump is bullish about winning over Latino voters, which means he looks pretty good on paper and on TV, which is, as we all know, a powerful combination for former President Trump. There's just one wrinkle, and Rubio did address this back in January in an interview. Take a listen.
Would you be interested in being vice president?
Well, we're both from the same state, so that's probably not going to work that way. But, you know, ultimately, I believe he's going to win. He's going to be our next president.
So the Constitution prohibits electors from electing a vice president and president from the same state. There are ways around this, though, and it's happened before. Rubio could resign his Senate seat and move to a different state. That also adds another little wrinkle here, Jose, which would mean that Governor DeSantis, a more recent rival of Trump's, would be able to appoint a senator for that seat. But this could be a good option for the former president. I'm told by sources that he will be sort of auditioning top contenders, which also includes Senator Tim Scott, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, and some other folks that you had on your list up there. Former retired neurosurgeon Ben Carson as well. He's going to be auditioning them on the campaign trail. They'll be holding events, holding rallies. Another critical component for a potential pick is their ability to raise money at a time when we're talking a lot about the former president's finances. And Rubio has shown his prowess with that. He raised about $50 million when he was running back in 2016. So a lot of factors to consider here. But we are also hearing from two sources that the timeline for an announcement, there's growing consensus that around June, about a month before the convention, would be a good time to announce. No decisions have been made yet, but that is some consensus around the June timeline there, Jose.
Dasha Burns in Palm Beach, thank you so very much. Carlos, former Trump counselor Kellyanne Conway pitched Rubio as Trump's running mate in a New York Times op-ed back in February. What's your reaction to this? You know the senator well.
Well, Jose, in large part, this is about the Hispanic vote. For years, Republicans have been satisfied with losing the Hispanic vote by a smaller margin every time to try to make up that advantage that Democrats have had. Now they believe also that they can win the Hispanic vote. And someone like Rubio, who comes from a state with a heavy Hispanic population, who is himself Cuban American, could potentially help deliver that vote for Donald Trump and maybe compete to a tie with Democrats or perhaps win the Hispanic vote. And remember, Republicans have to make up for a lot of those suburban voters that Donald Trump can't win. So they're looking to Hispanics, maybe to some African Americans to help make up that difference. Rubio would be very attractive. Of course, they're both from the same state. That's a big complication.
And I want to ask you about that because there's also the added issue, and Dasha was talking about, that he's telegenic and that he's a very good fundraiser and that he has, time in the Senate already put in, won re-election a couple of times in Florida. He's Cuban American. He's not Mexican American. And the overwhelming population of Latinos in the United States, more than 60%, are Mexican American. He also has the advantage that he's perfectly fluent in Spanish, which is something that people underestimate. But there's the issue of he lives in the same state, and does he have that national recognition in the Latino community?
Well, he has been on the national stage long enough, Jose, that a lot of Hispanic Americans, regardless of whether they're Cuban American or not, do know Marco Rubio. He's a known quantity. He has foreign policy credentials. He's always been very visible when it comes to Latin American policy. He's a high-ranking member of the Intelligence Committee in the Senate. So there are a lot of advantages to a Rubio vice presidency. The question is Rubio willing to take that chance? Is he willing to risk his place in the Senate for being vice president?
And he would have to, I mean, so what are the points would be he would have to, I guess, resign from the Senate.
That's right.
And then he would have to literally move his family and himself
because
out of Florida.
Because he could no longer be a Florida resident, he would have to resign from the Senate and move to, I guess, the state of his choice, right? For Dick Cheney, it was obvious he moved to Wyoming, which is where he was from originally. For Rubio, I guess he could really move anywhere. It'd be interesting.
And Alencia, President Biden, meanwhile, took a jab at Trump yesterday during a campaign reception in Dallas when referencing a person coming up to him and said, Mr. President, I need your help. I'm being crushed with debt. I'm completely wiped out. I had to say, Donald, I can't help you. Trump's struggling with fundraising. Biden is not. Why do you think this is?
Well, listen, I think that, President Biden is having the conversation and letting the American people know that it is unfortunate that Donald Trump is taking away from the American people, right? He is fundraising to pay his his legal bills, right? He is taking from the backs of the American people. And I think President Biden is going to continue to use this point and that interaction to expand upon his economic message. Sure, he will throw jabs at Donald Trump and talk about their money troubles, but he will also use this as a moment to talk about why it's important to invest in the Biden campaign that has overwhelmingly raised a significant amount of money at this point in a re-election campaign, as well as talk about the reason that you're investing in this campaign is because we have the economic plan that will work for you.
And Alencia, I mean, let's talk about the Kennedy family. They took a group photo with the president on St. Patrick's Day, not including Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is going to be stepping up their support for Biden. How significant is this for the RFK Jr. campaign?
Oh, this is very significant, but it's something that a lot of us, I wouldn't be surprised to see, because we all know that RFK Jr. has kind of been, the ostracized member of the Kennedy family, right? People have distanced themselves from him because of his conspiracy theories, his anti-vax stance, a lot of his very extreme positions on a lot of issues that the Kennedy family supports. And on contrast, they have been supporters of President Biden. I was at a reception for Women's History Month earlier this week, and Maria Shriver, who is a member of the Kennedy family, was there to help the Biden administration announce their investment and women's healthcare research, which was historic, right? So not only are they signaling to RFK Jr. that this isn't serious, as well as that the Kennedy legacy does not support what he is doing, they are also showing the American people that if this is a family that you have trusted when it comes to policies and positions, President Biden and his administration and where they are going is where we're going to show our support. And so I do think it will have an impact on some of the people who don't pay attention to politics, but they hear the last name Kennedy and they think that he is like his uncle and all of them in JFK. But you see the majority of the Kennedys that are still with us continuing to support President Biden.
Carlos Curbelo and Alencia Johnson, thank you both so very much for being with us.